So what we mean by this last one here, if you took a tissue sample of an animal, okay, and put it under a microscope, you would find that that tissue is made up of cells that are eukaryotic. Okay? Same thing for if we had a piece of plant tissue that we looked at under a microscope, or a piece of mushroom tissue, or fungus tissue. Protista cell, so amoeba, paramecium, and euglena. Okay? Each of those under a microscope would have the kind of structures that we're going to look at here in just a minute. Okay? All right, hold on, Hannah. Okay. Ooh. So, here are some examples of eukaryotic cells. Okay? Red blood cells, which hopefully you studied in 4th grade. An onion root cell. Okay? Now, this is actually kind of a more realistic picture of what a cell would actually look like under a microscope. It's typically more clear. Okay? Again, you can kind of see some of the structures. I would assume that's the nucleus. This is the outside of the cell membrane as well as the cell wall, which we'll get to in plant cells in a little bit. Also, plant cells tend to be more square-shaped than circle-shaped. Okay? That's one of the main differences there. This right here is a nerve cell. Okay? That is eukaryotic because you can see there's the nucleus, right? A defined nucleus, which means it's eukaryotic. Paramecium, also eukaryotic. You can see the nucleus right here. Mushroom cells, also eukaryotic. Amoeba, also eukaryotic. Okay? Now, those are examples of eukaryotic cells in general. Okay? And remember, they can be unicellular or multicellular. We talked about in the classification unit how sometimes some of the organisms in the eukaryote domain can be unicellular. They can be made of one cell. But they're still eukaryotic because there's a nucleus in there, as well as other organelles. Okay? So they can be unicellular or multicellular, meaning made of many cells. It just depends on the organism. Examples of eukaryotic cells from the animal kingdom. Then I'm going to take some questions, so just hang on. Okay? In the animal kingdom specifically, all right, this right here is a frog skin cell sample. Okay? So like frog tissue, this is what it would look like under a microscope. Okay? This right here is what red blood cells look like in a bird. These are bird red blood cells.
They look like cables.
This is just a nerve cell, like I showed you before. Now, what's cool about nerve cells, though, is notice how they're shaped, right? They have like one central location where the nucleus is, and then it has these like branches that kind of split off of it, right? So what would happen is this would be a branch that would connect to another nerve cell. And that nerve cell would have other branches that connect to another nerve cell, okay? Those branches are called synapses, all right? And those synapses are used to communicate messages or feelings throughout your body. When you stub your toe, it doesn't take 5 minutes for you to realize, ow, that hurt, right? You feel it almost instantly. That's because those synapses branch out and the feeling is transferred very quickly because you have all those bridges that communicate the feeling. Okay? That's what a nerve cell does. These are muscle cells. Muscle cells are what we call striated. They're more kind of stretched out and elongated. Okay? Look like they're kind of woven together. This is, I think it's a zebrafish skin cell. This is a dog muscle cell. Also, you can see how it's kind of stretched out, but notice it's eukaryotic because it has a nucleus here. Okay? And then red blood cells as well. Okay? Okay, I'll take these 4 hands, and then we got to move on. Landon?
We have a blank saying what type of eukaryotic cell is influenced. So this kind of
We have not gotten to that yet.
Oh, so that's on another slide?
Yes. It's coming up. Hannah?
On the very first slide that we did, and you're talking about like the tissue from the animals. What do you mean by like tissue? Or like how do you get like tissue from a plant? I thought tissue was only in humans.
No, plants have tissue as well. So like bark, for example, that's a plant tissue. Or you know how like if you take a plant and you kind of like You tear off the stem. Sometimes it there's little pieces you can kind of peel off. That would be plant tissue as well.
Oh, so like plant tissue is on the outside?
Really, a tissue is anything where you have multiple cells working together to perform one job. Mm-hmm.
So tissue, I feel like tissue is usually on the outside.
Yes, could be outside or inside. Mm-hmm. Parker.
So you know how the squid have or some squid have skin cells that can change color?
Yes.
I have seen a video of there was like a dead squid that washed up, but the squid there were dots all over it, and they were getting bigger and smaller.
Interesting.
Or the cells were still
still functioning.
Yeah.
Interesting. Nathan? You're not Nathan. Sorry. Ethan.
So with the muscle cells, are they like cells of the muscles? Like these like muscles or cells?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Like every single muscle?
Every single what?
Animal muscle?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So they move. Yeah.
Okay. Moving on for right now. We'll get to more questions later. Okay. One type of eukaryotic cell is an animal cell. This is the kind of cell that makes up all organisms in kingdom Animalia. Now, on the last slide, I just showed you many different types of cells in animals. Dog muscle cells, red blood cells, bird red blood cells, nerve cells, skin cells. Okay? Now, each of them have their own unique characteristics, but in general, all of those cells will have the parts that we're going to look at today. Okay? So yes, there are minor differences, but we're going to learn the general organelles inside of the cell. Okay? Yes?
So can we maybe do the video maybe next day? Because it does go into all of this, and it could be.
No, I haven't watched it yet. Remind me today. I'll make a note to myself. Okay?
That's with biology.
Okay. All right. So organelles. If you look at the word organelles, everyone look up here. Look. If you look at the word organelles, you should be able to see the word organ in there, right? This suffix "els" basically just means little or tiny. So the word organelles means little organ or tiny organ. Okay? Let's think about our bodies for a second. Are you good now?
Yep.
Okay. Within our bodies, we have multiple organs that perform different jobs, right? Okay. Let's think about our stomach. That's an organ, and our stomach's job is to help digest our food and absorb nutrients from the food for our bodies, right? Think about your heart. Your heart is an organ. Actually, it's a muscle, actually, but its job is to pump blood throughout your body, right? Your lungs. Your lungs are an organ. Job of your lungs is to take the oxygen you breathe in, transform it into a form that your cells can use, and then get the waste, which is carbon dioxide, out. Okay? Every single organ in our body has a specific job. So it makes sense then that the organelles, the little organs within the cell, each have their own job as well, right? Now, they're not going to be like stomach and lungs and heart and things like that. They're going to be named more like the words you see up here, okay? But we are going to talk about each of these organelles and what their job is within the cell. Does that make sense? Okay, so this whole thing is the cell. Each of these little structures is a different organelle, little organ that performs one job inside the cell. But the cell needs all of it to survive. Just like we need all of our organs to survive, the cell has to have every single part working together, like a puzzle almost, to get it working properly. Okay? All right, hold on to your questions for right now because we're going to run out of time. Okay. So, animal cell organelles. Here's what you have to know. it is easiest to think about the cell as a city. Okay? If we think about a city, there are multiple things that a city needs to function well, right? It needs a headquarters, like a mayor's office. It needs sidewalks, people to walk around on. It needs a power plant to supply power to the city. It needs highways for people to travel on throughout the city, correct? So, when we talk about the organelles, we are going to describe what their actual job is, but then we're going to compare it to like a part of a city. It just helps us remember it a little bit easier. Does that make sense? Okay, so first organelle we're going to look at is the cell membrane. You'll get this little guy here in a minute.
What?
Cell membrane. Okay? The cell membrane surrounds the entire cell. Okay? So if I were to kind of draw it for you, in this diagram, it's this kind of bubble that covers the whole outside. Okay? Now, in the diagram, this particular picture shows you what it would look like if you could peel back the membrane and look inside. Okay? Now, again, cells are not actually colorful like this. Okay? But the diagram colors the individual parts so that we can see them a little better. Okay? All right, so the cell membrane surrounds the whole outside. Okay? It separates the cell from its external environment. It's kind of like a bubble. All right? Keeps all the cell parts inside and kind of keeps it separated from all the other cells. All right? Now, raise your hand if you've seen the movie Thor.
Which one?
First one, or second one, or third one. Okay, you know the guy that controls the Bifrost?
Yeah.
He like opens the Bifrost and allows people in.
Hemendall.
Okay?
Yeah.
He is like the gatekeeper, right? If someone is good, he lets them in. If they're bad, he doesn't let them in. Okay? That's exactly how the cell membrane operates. Okay? If something is good for the cell, something like oxygen or energy or water or nutrients, then it will let it come into the cell. If it is something bad, okay, toxin, waste, other things like that, it will not let it into the cell, or it will try not to. Okay, so that is called semi-permeable. Say semi.
Semi.
Permeable.
Permeable.
Good. The word permeable or permeate means to enter into something. Okay, when you get a shot, the needle permeates your skin. Okay, so semi-permeable is something that is somewhat able to go inside. Does that make sense? So the cell membrane decides, okay, will I let this in or will I not? Okay, it acts as the gatekeeper. Make sense? All right. Next organelle is the cytoplasm. Now, I mentioned this a little bit yesterday after the video, but the cytoplasm is kind of like watery, almost like jelly. Like, it's not quite as thin as water, although I believe it is mostly made of water, but it's more kind of jelly-like. Okay? It is located throughout the entire cell inside the cell membrane. I think about it kind of like a pool, right? If I had lots of things floating in the pool, they would all be floating inside the water, right? Kind of moving all throughout that. Now, what the cytoplasm does is it allows materials to move through the cell. I'll show you a video probably tomorrow that kind of goes through all the organelles, and you'll see that inside the cell is kind of like this floating pool of stuff. Okay? That's all of that empty space. So the arrows are pointing to the empty space. All of the empty space is cytoplasm. Okay? Now, let's think about the city for a second. How does someone move around in a city? Pretend like we're going to go down to downtown Dallas. How would you move around? How would you get from the store down to the post office? Hattie?
Well, you would use sidewalks.
You would use sidewalks to walk down, right? Or you could hop in your car and drive on the road. So we say that the cytoplasm is like the sidewalks in a city. That's what you would use to move around, right? So that's what we kind of call like the sidewalks of the city of the cell. Okay? Okay. Oh, this part here. So within the jelly-like liquid stuff, there are little tiny filaments and tubules, like little sticks, basically, that acts like almost like a spider web. Okay? It provides some sort of structure and shape for the cell and keeps it from being one just big mushy ball. Does that make sense? Okay. Caleb. On organelles? Like you don't know what they are? Organelles carry out the activities that keep a cell alive. Little organ. The term organelle literally means little organ.
Cell membrane and
Surrounds all cells. Reagan?
I didn't get the technical point for organelle.
Like the organs that make up your body, each kind of organelle is specialized to carry out a specific function within a cell. Okay? Alright, so we have cell membrane, the gatekeeper, cytoplasm, the sidewalks. We're going to do probably one more for today. The nucleus. Okay? Here's where the mayor comes up. Okay? Now, in the diagram, you should see the arrow is pointing to this bracket, right? The bracket kind of pointing to the whole thing. Okay? So, this whole middle structure here is the nucleus. This big ball right here in the middle. Okay? It is located near the center of the cell. In an animal cell, it is almost always going to be in the center. It is home to the cell's DNA and its chromosomes. Okay? The chromosomes is just the shape the DNA makes, which we'll talk about that later on in further notes from here. But in the picture, it's this red kind of spindly looking stuff.
Spindly.
Okay? Looks like sticks, basically. Now, if you look closely, you see there is a smaller ball inside of that, this purple ball right here. Okay? That is another organelle that we're going to talk about tomorrow. Okay? But what surrounds the whole thing is the nucleus. All right? Now, the DNA is like the instructions for the cell. If a cell is building itself up, the DNA tells it how to build it, what kind of cell it will be, etc. If the DNA or the instructions say, hey, we're going to be a skin cell, then that cell will become a skin cell. If the DNA says we're going to be a red blood cell, it's going to be a red blood cell. If the DNA says we're going to be a muscle cell, it will build a muscle cell. So it's like the instructions. It is what controls the entire cell. Okay? If the nucleus says to do something, the cell will do it. All right? So because it's in control, it's like the headquarters, basically. We kind of compare it to like the mayor's office of the city. Right? The mayor is in charge of the city. His office, or like the Capitol building almost, is where all of the major important events take place. They give the instructions for the city. They tell them when to pay their taxes. They tell them to do all these different things. The nucleus is the exact same thing. So we say it's like the mayor's office. Make sense? Okay. Landon, question?
I have two questions.
Okay.
Yeah. The question with the conversation.
Okay.
So if the nucleus is City Hall, the DNA is the people's, and the purple ball is the mayor.
Close. The purple ball we're actually going to say is something else.
And also, what does DNA stand for?
Deoxyribonucleic acid. Yep.
Oh, I like DNA better.
One of the longest words I know. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna get to your questions. Okay. I'm gonna stop the recording, and then we are gonna be done for today. Tomorrow we'll finish up the rest.